This is the Todd Shapiro Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.
This voice is familiar. Darren Gill, everybody. Hi, Darren.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
There he is.
Darren formerly, of Namaste. That's
Yep.
cool. We became very close on air. You know everything there is to know about the compliance side of cannabis. I mean, you're just like you're just.
Man.
Well, I wouldn't say everything, but I know a
lot.
few things.
You know a few things. You know some things, and so tell us what brings you down to MJBiz.
So we're down at MJBiz. We're looking at a bunch of CBD product suppliers. I've been consulting and advising for some interesting companies that are now starting to look at Cannabis 3.0. And there's been a
3.0.
3.0.
Aren't we just starting 2.0, Lance?
It kind of feels like it. But Darren and I were talking about this a little bit earlier because he is definitely, at minimum, my equal in Canada when it comes to knowledge. I mean, this guy knows it, so he'll fill you in.
Yeah, no. So 3.0 now really is looking at how we're going to get a lot of the grassroots producers now into the regulated market. We've seen a lot of these LPs that have built some very, very large and successful organizations. Yet I think LPs and the government are the only two entities I've ever seen lose money selling cannabis. So, we've got a massive supply, especially within BC, where I'm from, in the interior regions, where you've got folks that have been doing this as lifelong endeavors and passions that have basically been blocked out of the industry. So a lot of the companies that I'm starting to consult and advise for now are folks that are looking to help set up these micro canna parks, so we can get these guys out of growing in their basements and in their sheds in their backyard into a properly regulated environment, but where we will work to take care of all the ancillary services around that, so they can focus on doing what they love, which is growing great weed, and we can focus on dealing with the bureaucrats, signing the agreements, getting them regulated supply, packaging, branding, stuff like that.
Very interesting. Darren Gill's with us, and it sounds like the more mom and pop shops, the grassroots. I feel like, and Lance, maybe you could speak true to this. That's more of a California approach.
100%. So this is something exactly where Darren and I was talking. It is exactly what we're dealing with specifically in Northern California. So we do have a lot of these, what we call cottage licensed growers, which is traditionally an acre or less. And to his point, these are these mom and pops. Sometimes they're multi-generational, they're second, third generation growers. And they're facing a lot of challenges because these people traditionally have done one thing and one thing phenomenally well, and that is grow some top shelf, as the kids call it, fire. So for them to have to be compliant with the rules, the regulations, to his point, the distribution, marketing, all these things. And there's been a couple successes. Specifically, I'd love to call out, like Mendocino Co-op has a great program. I'm a member of Humboldt County Growers Alliance, which works a lot in helping individuals up there, but it's a huge challenge. And they're the ones who were, maybe it's a played out term, I call it the trailblazers. They're the ones that were doing it before it was cool. And they're the ones that were putting it out on the line. And not all of them are outlaws, and not all of them were going against the grain. They just wanted to make a living, survive, and do what they enjoyed. So to have a program like this, because a lot of it does carry up the coast. BC reminds me a lot, personally, of California, as far as the culture and the craft. And I do love Toronto and New Brunswick and Calgary and everywhere else it's going on.
I don't love Calgary.
But there's
no.
Edmonton?
I don't mind.
But as far as provinces go, I do always look to BC because it does give me a lot of memories and a lot of similarities as far as what's going on where I'm from in California.
Probably a few foggy memories too.
Yeah. We did hang out. We were on a panel together.
Oh yeah, that's right. So Darren Gill's with us and Lance Lambert. So can you disclose some of the companies maybe you are helping out right now?
Absolutely.
I don't mind.
So one of the companies that I'm working with is a company called GrowTech Labs, woman-led initiative with Berinda Rizzotti, who's the CEO over there. Fantastic team that she's put together around herself. And she's one of those people who's sat thoughtfully by and kind of watched the industry transform and is now starting to move in. And I think one of the things I was telling Lance earlier, we're even looking at a couple of sites around town. And the premiums that folks were expecting, these businesses that were selling for $25-30 million are now at a much more reasonable acquisition cost, where it now starts to make a lot of sense for us to potentially look at acquiring an LP site, bringing in the craft, the original kind of farm growers. Exactly. And I think the next wave that we're going to start to see in Canada is going to be this notion of farm to table. There's a lot of chat going on around about it now. And folks that don't want to buy from the government channel or don't want to be forced to buy from a traditional large-scale style LP. You look at the way the interior of BC was set up. There's literally communities that are sustained on cannabis.
100%.
You go into the Kootenays, they've actually launched a great Kickstarter program now for that region, where they're putting up, I think it was up to about $650,000 as a first initial grant offering to start trying to get these micro guys to come out and want to be part of the regulated environment.
Well, I like to hear that, because one of the things Lance and I have talked about for years and years is the amount of job growth that has come with this industry, and that's something that should be celebrated. And the more opportunities like this, grants or help the mom and pop shops, or even, like, let's be honest, for me, I went to radio college, right? Is there kind of a cannabis college?
There is.
There a way? Yeah. So
Yes, there are programs.
There's what is it? We have down by us Oakster Dam and Green Flower, which both Green Flower's in my backyard in Ventura County. Love those guys. And then I think up by you is Canna-Reps.
Yeah, there's Canna-Reps, but there's even I know Kwantlen College, for example, which is a local BC university. And they've started up a cannabis program, and there's stuff that's starting to happen now in the agricultural space in terms of training and availability around that as well.
what about Darren Gill U? Is that coming next?
Darren Gill U might be something we look at.
Gill U. I'd go to Gill U. I'd go to Gill U. I feel like I'd learn a lot of Gill U.
Sounds better than Lance.
DGU, it's got a nice ring to it.
It's like the McGill of cannabis.
Hey, Bilal, stop. Okay. It's just confusing. We're in a booth here with thousands of people at MJBiz, and then the voice of Bilal comes on. No, I love you, Bilal. I love you. You're a good dude. Well, that's good. And then what have you seen? Let's ask both of you, actually. I'll start with Lance. We're in the Boveda.com booth, and I know it just opened this morning, MJBiz, but has there sort of been something here at the MJBiz show that sort of stood out to you that maybe you haven't seen in years past?
Gosh, man. One thing, it's funny because you, amongst other friends that I talk to and do interviews with, have asked, okay, what's your predictions for 2020? And I actually decided for once to post this up on LinkedIn and say, hey, I've had a lot of people ask this question. And as far as what my prediction was for this show was a lot of international representation and a lot of new tech, which I'll touch on both those. International, I mentioned this, and we're going to have a few on the show, to have people show. We just actually had a friend, this bloke from Australia, that just came up the stairs to wave and say hi. I mean, that guy has 4 flights and 24 hours of travel to get here. Same with Michael from South Africa. South America is here, even representation from Asia in the Eastern Bloc. So you have this international, they're coming over to see what's going on. We've talked about the ministers that have come from other commonwealths to visit, both provinces represented here at this couch. A lot of effort spent on focusing on what's going on in specifically BC and Ontario, but they are coming to the States as well to see what's going on, what's successful in, and segueing into, to see what new tech. Because there's still people out there that use turkey bags. We love to joke because we both have friends that still use them. But we have people who are using turkey bags, and it's like you've got the cure tube now, man. You don't need a turkey bag. It's like taking your clothes to the river and banging them on a rock versus using a washing machine. Like there's some phenomenal
tell us what
here.
just because that's insider sort of knowledge here for what a turkey bag might be and what this new machine might do that helps expedite that process, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. So a turkey bag, just to give a little brief insight from cure to consumption, as I say. So really that adventure starts with pulling down your crop. Obviously, you buck the plant, and then you need to cure it. You need to let it off gas. You need to let it kind of mature, almost like grapes, if you will. And a lot of times that occurs, these guys throw them in turkey bags and then they put them in totes, and that's, there's more turkey bags sold to this industry and there's more HDX totes sold to this industry than any Thanksgiving or any college move into campus.
I just feel like people would never have known that unless you talk about it. People on the inside would know it, but the average person would never have even thought of that.
And I don't mean, turkey bags, there's some friends that are very old school, I respect it. They do, because of the way they function, they're cool for curing, but not for storage. They maintain the actual smell, but they still dissipate the moisture. So to use something that you're losing all the moisture, i.e. losing the quality of the cannabis, subsequently drying it out, that's not, there's technology there. So something like the Cure Tube that actually does this properly, and you can store in, and it allows utilizing technology like Boveda to help you out. Those are things that are coming on. So again, a lot more tech, a lot more relevant stuff that's coming onto the scene, and that's what we're seeing a lot of. And I don't know if if maybe Darren has a little take too.
Let's hear it.
Coming down from Canada.
No, definitely. I mean, the international representation bit I completely agree with. I think it's been phenomenal to see, both Canada and the U.S. really here being viewed as leaders. And, there was an investor conference that was going on Monday, Tuesday, where you could see just the amount of investor presence out of Europe, out of Asia, that are now looking at what legalization to them means. I think the other interesting thing for this show has been representation of CBD in the hemp industry. Compared to last year, there's a lot more hemp. There's a hemp farming equipment. There's hemp, cultivar companies, and you can really see that movement of CBD through the U.S. as well, being a prominent presence here.
So, and the other things about the back to the foreign representation. This to me is huge because we've seen it now legalized in certain countries in Asia, which I don't think a lot of people would ever think. We've talked about the African connection. And I mean, at what point, and I've asked you this before, I'm going to ask Darren now. This is my new go-to question.
Here we go.
So, Kieran Sidhu from Halo Labs said 2031. You said 2027, I think, Lance Lambert. And now I'm going to ask Darren Gill, and you'll get the answers before the question. At what point do you see almost every country, if not every country in the world, to have legalized marijuana, legalized cannabis?
I think from a medical perspective, I would probably be more aligned with Lance. It's going to be before 2030, we should get there. Recreation, I think, is going to take a while to evolve, though, and what that means. And we look at the global industry and how, everything's kind of following suit around the pharma distribution model, and they're going with what's safe. But to really destigmatize it and get it to a point where it's a socially acceptable norm, I think we need to continue to push through for recreational. It's not good enough to just stop at, you can get it if a doctor deems you to need it.
Yep. One of the things last night I found out about, asking some questions around some people who I was hanging out with, is the amount of premium brands now that we're starting to see in the cannabis space. And I mean premium brands to the point where one joint will go for $100. You think about it like a nice bottle of scotch or a nice fine wine. And is this stuff that you're starting to see more too? 100%. Sort of for, I don't want to say the elite, but for the conversation piece, the exact same way you would open up a bottle of wine and talk about it, tell the story.
Very true.
And that to me, it actually makes it it helps end the stigma on all levels, which I think is important.
Yeah, that's very much it. It ends the stigma. It erases that tabooism that's been associated with cannabis because, Canada and several other Commonwealth countries, Australia is a very good example of this, that really drank the Kool-Aid when it came to the war on drugs and the DARE program. Nixon did a lot of good things. Nixon lowered the voting age to 18 from 21 in this country. Nixon started the FDA. But Nixon also started this war on drugs, which specifically targeted minority groups, which is something that we're still working through with the advancement of legalization in this country. But you look at some of these other factors, and it's every conversation. And again, I know, Darren, you're the same way. You're like me. Like you came out of the green closet just like I did. You have these one-on-one conversations with people like I do. This just helps them understand, like, this is a plant. Like, if you're a fan of ginger or turmeric or echinacea or melatonin, I mean, there's all these different elements that people use that are herbalistic. And cannabis, it's just, to me, it's the miracle plant. I used to think that's taboo, but I think that's very accurate. And so there are things that normalize it. But to your point, Vegas is a town for that. I was just at a shop earlier, need to pick up some last-minute things for the booth, and they had papers from Shine. And Shine, awesome story. I love these guys. But Shine papers, they have gold rolling papers. They have silver rolling papers, and this is clutch. I mean, and these guys want it. I mean, I looked at a pack is $27, and I asked them, I'm like, how often do you sell them? They're like, oh, all the time. People want to come in. They want to get that top shelf flower, wrap it into top shelf paper, and then they want to throw it up on Instagram or throw it up on Twitter or Snap and just share that they're smoking the best of the best. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to get a great night's sleep and not be hungover tomorrow. Again,
you just gave me a business idea. Lance Lambert, Darren Gill's with us. We're live at MJBiz, man. We're on like the second tier. It's like a double-decker bus booth, the highest one in the entire building. And what's the square footage of this building anyway?
Oh, my gosh.
50,000 square feet? I don't know.
Yeah, we're in a few 100,000. We actually have the South Hall and the Central Hall, I believe, for this.
Thing is massive. Are there branded, like team-branded rolling papers? MLB just basically said you can kind of smoke. I don't know if you saw Major League Baseball today basically said, hey, if our players smoke weed, big deal. Can we? I want to get like a Blue Jays branded rolling paper. Can we license them? There's an idea. Can we do that?
There's a few companies. It's interesting, and Darren, you'll probably agree or give.
Is that a good idea or what?
I think it is a good idea because you're right. I mean, there's some big companies. I can see Futurola from here. These guys are out of Amsterdam. They have a phenomenal backstory. They've been coming on the scene, being big disruptors in the roller, pre-roll, in scaled pre-roll manufacturing. But they have some great papers. Mini Josh, love Mini Josh out of, he's with Raw. Raw Papers definitely is an international brand. I could see these guys start, if nothing else, almost not to reference like the like the gaming teams and stuff, but I could see them swooping in on some brand ambassadors and having like a Raw crew and having a Futurola crew, because it's gotten to that point. I mean, we're doing something special. We have an after party tonight, and you're definitely invited as well. But I've got Todd over here as a guest of honor. I have someone that's working on a $2,200 piece that is out of rolling paper and is going to be packed with some top shelf. And I mean, that's kind of one of the focal points. I'm letting the cat out of the bag. It's a huge surprise. I know about that. But this is something that it wows people. I mean, this is something I know that's going to blow up on Instagram and stuff, because people are just so intrigued by all the elements around this. And it's not the traditional, I hate the term even, but that quote unquote stoner culture. No, it's just the embracing it. And this is something that people are passionate about. And I have huge respect for that.
I mean, this is a great point you bring up. And I'll go to Darren here. I'll defer to him here. Have we now got away from the corporate types taking it public, making their money? How dare they? This was our advocacy groups. This is where we came from, and now they're stealing from us, basically. Have the communities merged? The expression which I love is a high tide raises all boats, right? And essentially, this industry should grow together to stop the in-house fighting. You see it in comedy, you see it anywhere. Are there more synergies now?
I think we're starting to see steps in the right direction, but I think this is where this 3.0 movement becomes a critical part. Is a lot of the legacy market growers feel like they've been shut out of this industry because it went to the corporate types, the bankers, the lawyers, and now everyone's favorite new push is CPG, right? We need a CPG executive, a CPG guru for this, that, and the other, and we're still seeing that tug of war between the grassroots guys, where packaging method was a Ziploc bag, and the happy balance of where we need to get to today. But you're going to see that evolution, and I think what will eventually wind up happening is once you start seeing enough of the micro guys start to pop up and get some market presence, this is going to become that kind of craft beer versus mainstream, healthy competitive environment. And eventually you'll probably start seeing a roll-up, because I imagine that those craft plays are going to be a lot more profitable.
Sure, and mergers and the the way sort of Labatt buys up everything these days. So the one thing that very few talk about, though, which is really a difficult stain on all of this, is still the black market. And I'll call it the black market. People call it the gray market. It's the black market. I don't care. That's what we know it as forever.
Well, that is, right?
And there's no gray area there. It's an illegal way of selling marijuana. I don't care.
Well, I think Canada managed to make it gray somehow.
Well, so let's discuss Canada, Darren Gill, because we've had Craig Bromell, who's on. He's one of the. I don't know if he's on the board or one of the directors or one of the management team of 360 Secure, one of my sponsors, that does a lot of the transport for the cannabis companies. And listen, he's been quite honest in saying, like, people have watched our stock go down a little bit. Here we are, though, a company that has great forecasts, that has a path to profitability, that is getting contract after contract, including expanding into the United States, doing very well for themselves. By the way, I can't give financial advice, but it's a company that I also invested and love. And he says this black market existing, though, is really hurting a lot of companies succeed. And why hasn't the government done more in terms of cracking down and really eliminating it? Because no other industry could ever. You can't even sell a hot dog without a license, street meat permit, to be able to go and sell a hot dog. What's going on there? Because if that's not controlled, then I still think there's going to be some issues.
I think 2020 for Canada will be a transition year. I mean, I think a lot of capital and equity has gone into the public markets there, where we've seen these companies get built and get absolutely slaughtered in the markets. And I think the government has recognized that. There's a lot of talk now around Health Canada with their community enforcement units that are now starting to go out, crack down on dispensaries. But again, this goes back to the earlier question of, have the two industries really come together? The more that we're going to continue to crack down and look like we're now supporting the LPs and the licensed producers, the more we're going to create that rift. So I think we're still going to continue to see that healthy friction until a point that, it's not fair to simply say we're going to crack down and put these guys out of business without giving them the path or the means to become a legally compliant entity.
I've never done this, and I keep meaning to research it, but the transition when prohibition ended for alcohol in the United States, I often wonder how long was that process where organized crime finally relinquished their control on alcohol, because they had it during prohibition.
They did,
and did that, and eventually, we saw. Look at the big, massive conglomerates now that control the liquor industry.
It's very
so
true.
Somewhere that had to happen. That had to go into a legal form, paying taxes, all this kind of stuff. So, and maybe there's a parallel there somewhere.
There is a bit. I haven't spent as much time as I wanted to look into that, because prohibition is very much a similarity. Of course, those of us that are purists, we hate to compare ourselves, but it's hard not to, because they are similar in that respect. But to your point, the days of bathtub gin and these guys bootlegging vodka from South Carolina to Texas, that really did die off relatively quick. And to your point, it was the effort from the government and law enforcement working in conjunction with each other, because they knew that at the end of the day, to your point, taxation, they knew that was going to help feed the coffers that keeps them in business. It's been really interesting with this. It's been a huge struggle, but I think the reason being is because, keep in mind, that prohibition was just years. This prohibition has been decades in the works. That's why I talk about second, third generation growers. I know literally their parents went up in the 60s and started growing, and here the youngest, the grandkids, are the ones that now have these boutique or have these mom and pop grows, right? So the longer someone's been doing something, the more that they've been numb to the fact that what they're doing is okay. And so you also face some other challenges, and this is more specifically to California, because it is one of the worst as far as black market. A lot of it is being sourced out of California, distributed across the country. But my gosh, we've talked about it. It's 75%, 80% is still, matter of fact, we saw it go up 5% as far as black market versus legal. And to your point, when we segued from Prop 215, which was gray market, that's what we call gray, says Wild West during Prop 215 or medical. When we segued in technically January of 2018 was the day when we switched over to Prop 64 from Prop 215 or adult use consumption, all of that operation became black market. There is no more gray. There's no more, it's black and white. Either you're above board and you pay and follow all the rules and regulations and have the permitting and all the rest of it, which in many instances works out being about a 50% taxation if you net out, because they're taxed 5 times from seed to sale, right? So that's tough though, because if you're, we're hypothetical, but let's just say that, Todd, that you're used to paying $35, $40 for an eighth back during Prop 215. Now you're being asked to pay $70 and you're like, wait, it's the same eighth. Maybe newer strains, right? Yeah. But really, at the end of the day, it's the same eighth, it's the same end result for you medically or
But we're fixing the roads, Lance.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I reference like Colorado, and you guys might have a good reference. I know BC's had some challenges, so maybe it's Toronto, maybe it's Ontario. But that's why I say Colorado. I mean, man, I was out there, I moved there the month it legalized to be in the industry. And by 2016, to give you an example, Pueblo High School, nice little small town, very south end of Colorado. Every individual that graduated, every senior graduate had a $6,000 tuition to go on to continuation, whether it be junior college or a 4-year. Didn't matter your GPA, didn't matter your ethnicity, didn't matter your religion, anything, your gender. No, everyone's. And that was because of the legalization. They've collected millions, over 100 million now, in taxes. So it is going to a good cause. It is paying for California's a little bit tougher. You're talking about a state that has a population of 40 million and it's the 5th wealthiest economy in the world. It takes them a little bit longer to do stuff. I just wish they were more in line with other places.
Yeah, Lance, Lambert, Darren, Gill with us here in MJBiz. I keep coming back to how really grandiose this. I really am, actually, and the booth helps when you're elevated from it all. So, and I only have I guess we only have 4 minutes here before we got to take a hard break. But Lance, you know that I'm involved in a psychedelics company.
Yep.
That's currently we're doing a raise for, and there's a whole other side of me away from radio that's involved in psilocybin. Lance involved as well.
Yes.
And
yes.
Is there any talk of psychedelics here at this conference?
If you don't mind me going for, I do have a few friends that's come up. They're looking very closely at it. Some individuals are already doing some testing out in Colorado around it, because as you all know, they haven't legalized per se, but they've deregulated in Denver, Berkeley, and Oakland. So
yes,
very
and I
relevant
think Oregon's
cities.
going to be next, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I think Oregon, they're already working on, on interstate commerce with cannabis. So I think they will as well. But you look at that, I mean, Berkeley is pivotal because that really was, I have to say, growing up in the Bay Area, that's where you went. That's where you went for psychedelics. That's where you went for mushrooms and acid. So it's always been associated with. But for Oakland to come along, and then Denver was another surprise for Denver Metro. But a lot of people don't understand. Do your homework. Psychedelics, specifically mushrooms, because they're natural, but also acid. They had an extensive amount of medical studies associated with that before the whole movement in war on drugs. It all of a sudden got squashed with that war on drugs, and they were finding a lot of success around some mental disabilities with it. So it really is a serious thing that I would, with that respect, associate with cannabis because, one, it's natural, if we're talking about mushrooms, and two, be more holistic in Eastern medicine. People are tired of their friends dying of opioid overdoses.
This is my big empathetic play here, and
Yep.
the reason why I want to get involved, having experienced suicide in our family, and just wondering what other methods might have been able to help. And the more studies you do, and you're right, they were squashed at one point,
Yes.
and now there's 38 clinical trials going on in Canada and America combined.
Correct.
To find out, can we make a difference, and will there be medical claims that can be made within psilocybin? Darren, going about a minute here. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we've started to see the movement in Canada as well that, they're doing now early stage clinical trials with psychologists and, war veterans and stuff that are coming back. But I mean, Lance and I were talking about it downstairs. I've had chats with other folks around the conference as well. You can see that a lot of people are really starting to bet that this is going to become the next movement. And the fortunate part for us is there is a lot of science and study already behind it. So we're much further ahead on the curve there.
And I think because you're from Vancouver, I think even Vancouver City Council denied a claim to make psilocybin. There was like a really recent news story that they basically denied the claim that it would be considered illegal. They didn't say it was legal, but they kind of opened up the door to decriminalization.
So we have an issue where we've had a few folks in Vancouver that have been big cannabis activists now start to lobby and push. In fact, one of them's actually created a website for medical mushrooms. And I believe it was the chief of police was quoted as saying, we have an epidemic going on with fentanyl and opioids, and this is not a priority for enforcement. We're monitoring the situation, but it was kind of one of those, very similar to what happened with cannabis. We know it's there, but we're not going to focus on it.
And that's when you start to see the barriers really break down. When they're not going to arrest you for this stuff. There's movement. Well, listen, Darren, it's so nice to catch up with you.
Great to be back with you guys.
Congrats on moving forward and doing so much great consulting. One of the brightest minds in the industry. I'm sitting next to the other one of the brightest minds in the industry.
Brothers. He's got some great things going on over here, though.
This is the Todd Shapiro Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.